Spirit of God, open our ears to hear your voice, our minds to understand your words, and our hearts to receive your great love. Amen. Good morning, St. Luke's. 11:15, my people. Yes, I like to sleep in a little on Sunday. So we have a passage today in the gospel that is quite a pivotal passage in the telling of Jesus' story. I love the way that each of the gospels gives us a little bit of a different perspective on Jesus. Mark is no different, giving us a unique journey that Jesus goes on. And as we see ourselves in this journey, as we see the activity, the teaching of Jesus in this journey, we begin to see here in chapter 10 that he is on the final stretch of his ministry. He is on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of the Passover, and he knows what is ahead of him. At this point, he's at the height of his ministry, the height of his fame. He's a bit of a celebrity in Israel at this point, and so there's a great multitude following him. And along the way, Jesus has tested the discipleship of those he has met, those who have journeyed with him. And this question continues to come up, and I think it's a question that is asked of us this morning in the reading. Will you follow Jesus? Many who are following him because of the miracles that they have seen. They're waiting to see what might happen next. They're following him because their bellies have been filled in the miracle of the feeding. We're told it's a great multitude, but we have to wonder, will they continue to follow him once they understand the cost of discipleship? As the journey has come nearer and nearer to the end, nearer and nearer to that point, that last week in Jerusalem, Jesus has begun to speak to his disciples at length about the suffering he must face, and it's disturbing to them. They don't want to hear this about their friend, their leader, Jesus. And as a matter of fact, even one of the closest disciples to him, Peter, at one time begins to rebuke him for saying this. How dare you? Don't talk about that, Jesus. Don't kind of talk about the suffering and all of that you must face. Perhaps it can be avoided. And this is one of the most interesting responses we see of Jesus throughout the Gospels. Here's what I really love. I love the passages where Jesus says something just a little bit shocking, right? Where he kind of goes off script and you're like, what? Did you just say that? And so Peter is saying, no, Jesus said, you don't need to be talking about this, not in front of everybody. We're going to lose followers. They don't want to hear about suffering. And Jesus turns around and he says, get behind me, Satan. Now, mind you, this is right after Peter has just declared his belief that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And so this opens up the door for Jesus to begin describing the cost of following him to the multitudes. He says to them, if you're going to come after me, if you're going to follow me on this journey that we're on, you must deny yourself, you must take up your cross, and you must go wherever I lead. This is a little bit of a striking thing to the multitudes. To this point, many of them have been following because of the miracles, because of the show, right? And now Jesus is beginning to make it personal that, oh, you mean there might be some sacrifice? That I'm not just here for what benefits me, but I might have to give something in all of this. That I participate with you, Jesus, in this journey. And I journey as you journey. And then the next part of it, take up your cross, is even more poignant to them because this is a first century group of people who are under the oppression of the Roman Empire. And the symbol of the oppression of the Roman Empire is the cross. And so to be told, hey, this journey's not all fun and games. You've got to have some skin in the game, right? You've got to participate. You may have to deny what you want. And there may be some real sacrifice, maybe even to the point of your life. It seems to me that Jesus is giving the message that this multitude must be all in. Have you heard that phrase before? I don't think Winnie is asking us to deny ourselves and take up our cross just yet, but maybe a little bit of sacrifice along the way. We don't like the word sacrifice too often, but a better word might just be community, might just be belonging. Do we belong? Belonging is not just a matter of being accepted. Belonging is a matter of giving of ourselves. It's a mutuality that we have with one another. We are woven together in an inescapable garment of destiny, as it were. And so what not only do we have to receive in belonging, but what do we have to give when we're all in? When we get to Jericho at the beginning of the passage that we read, we're reminded of the history of Jericho. Have you heard of this town before? It's one of those things that you hear growing up in Sunday school, right? It's a place where the children of Israel first and finally, after years of wandering, enter into the promise of God, the promised land. And so they're following Joshua, and they get to this city, and this is the initial moment of them taking hold of what God has promised. And so what we see is a great victory for the children of Israel. This is a moment of celebration, and so Jericho brings to mind the celebration of God's promise and taking hold of God's promise. But we can't forget those who were inside the city and the incredible devastation that Jericho also represents, the incredible suffering that Jericho represents for some. And so as Jesus nears this moment at the end of his ministry to make his last trip to Jerusalem, he points toward both the great victory that we will see as he enters triumphantly into the city and is celebrated as the coming king. And we also see the incredible suffering that will be ahead of him as even the multitudes who follow him turn on him. And in verse 47, we're introduced to Bartimaeus, described as a blind beggar, completely dependent on the good will of others just to survive. This reminds me of so many that we see at Crossroads each and every day. Our unhoused neighbors with physical disabilities who have no means to care for themselves and are often left on the side of the road begging and crying out for someone to come along who will care. Bartimaeus has obviously heard of Jesus and the miracles he has performed. In desperation or hope or faith, he cries out to Jesus for mercy and calls him the Son of David. First time that we've seen this term used for Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. It's a recognition both of his royal bloodline and of the possibility that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, could be the long-awaited Messiah. If Jesus is who Bartimaeus believes him to be, he cannot risk letting him go by. The Son of David designation is very important, as I have mentioned, because Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, and he will be celebrated in the triumphal entry. Here, a seemingly insignificant blind beggar becomes the one chosen to announce Jesus' place as Messiah, the thing ultimately that will lead to his death. When Bartimaeus cries out, the disciples in the crowd following Jesus attempt to silence him in the same way that they have recently attempted to keep the children from coming to Jesus earlier on in this chapter. They're like, hey, Bartimaeus, this guy's important. He's busy. He's got an agenda. He's on his way to do something important. Can't you see that you should not be bothering him in this moment? In crying out over the protest of the multitude, Bartimaeus seems to represent all of us in some ways. In those moments where we have been silenced, in those moments where we feel passed by, in those moments where we are pushed aside or hidden. This too often is the reality even in our own society. sometimes we see this even in the church. Sometimes there are those who judge others as less important, less worthy of attention, less acceptable based upon their circumstances or other factors. Most often, these factors are completely beyond their control. Sometimes even in the benevolence that we do as a church, we have an expectation that certain groups should stay in their place, should stay out of the way. Here, Bartimaeus seems to cry out for all of those who have been left out, left behind, and silenced. And he says, I want to be heard. Now, it would have been easy for Jesus to continue on. But instead, in verse 49, we get what I think is the most striking picture of this entire passage, one that speaks to us, one that calls to us, and it says that Jesus stood still. Think about this. The Messiah himself, on this journey, potentially thousands of people following him, and because of this one man crying out, Jesus stops his journey. He stands still. He notices the man. He hears him. He hears his voice. And he says, bring him to me. Come to me. He invites the single voice to come and be heard and to be seen. Jesus here goes against social convention, as he always does. He continues to show his solidarity with and love for the disenfranchised, the marginalized of the world. Notice that here he continues in the vein of opening up relationship with him to all. All are welcome to follow and journey with Jesus. He shows his compassion by stopping and calling the man to himself, acknowledging his humanity and his dignity. He responds to his cry. He's attentive to his need. He could have gone on, focused on his own journey, but as he often does, he stops and gives his full attention to the one who is crying out. He asks this question when Bartimaeus gets to him, and it's an interesting question. He says to Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? Now, if you read this passage, and I encourage you, read chapter 10 as a whole passage if you get a chance. Because in verse 36 of this same chapter, Jesus has asked the exact same question to two of his closest disciples, the ones you would think would know what to ask for. They're given the opportunity on the journey. Jesus says to James and John, what do you want from me, as they approach him? And interestingly, James and John don't come to him from a place of need. They don't approach him and say, hey, we realize that we need something from you, to something that we lack. Instead, they come to him seeking power and position and privilege, asking, when you come into your kingdom, can one of us sit on your right hand and the other on your left? They're jockeying for position with Jesus rather than coming to Jesus in a position of vulnerability and need. Bartimaeus responds to the question by saying, I want to regain my sight. I want to see again. Fascinating, because it would seem that Bartimaeus at one time had his sight, and he realizes what he has lost. I want to regain that which has been lost. I want to regain that which has been taken from me. How many times have we cried out because of what has been taken to us by our own experiences? The losses, the grief, the trauma, the tragedy that we may have in our lives. We have lost at some level the sight that we might otherwise have, often blinded by grief or fear or anger. We find ourselves in a position where we need to see what it is that we need to see and come to Jesus expressing that need. I can't help but continue to be fascinated, because Jesus says to this man, your faith has made you whole. You would think that this celebrity evangelist would take credit for this, right? I mean, this is a perfect opportunity to take a big offering if, hey, I've done a big miracle, right? No. Instead, in this moment, Jesus is in awe of the faith of Bartimaeus. I would say he learns something at this point from Bartimaeus. And he says, your faith, you did it. So often we dismiss what it is within each and every one of us that can make us whole. And we often dismiss the thing that we have that can help make others whole. We don't always see the power that each and every one of us carries within ourselves. And not only the power that we carry within ourselves, but the power that is increased when we choose to journey together with Jesus, when we choose to be all in. We have that increased, amplified ability to do great things together when we have faith in Jesus, faith in one another. And so Bartimaeus has not only gained physical sight, regained physical sight, but he has gained the spiritual sight that would lead him to follow Jesus. Jesus says, go, you're healed, you're good, go and take care of things, put things back together, go back to your home, your family, get back to a full life. And Bartimaeus in this moment says, you know what? I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to the place of blindness, the place of loss. I want to go forward with you, Jesus. He chooses to go on this journey, to deny himself, to take up his cross and journey with Jesus. And Jesus goes on, and Bartimaeus with him, going to a place of redemption and restoration, even though there's a great cost. So, where do you see yourself? Where do we see ourselves individually, as a congregation? Where are we in this story? And we may be in several of the characters in this story. Are we like Bartimaeus? Are we the ones in crisis? And I would dare say every one of us in here at one point or another has been that one crying out, has been the one that has lost sight, nowhere to turn, blinded by our circumstances, blinded by grief and loss and injustice even, blinded by what's going on around us in the world sometimes. We're crying out for help, for hope, but people keep passing us by. And we feel lost and lonely and rejected, unseen, unheard. And we're desperate for someone to come by and help us. Do we see ourselves sometimes in the multitudes? Have we been the ones that are too busy with our own lives to hear the one crying out, and as a matter of fact, say to the one crying out, hey, keep it down. This is not the right time, right? Decided that some are more worthy of attention than others. Some are more worthy of being heard than others. A lot of times we stand on tradition and protocol, and we do want to silence others. One of the most beautiful parts of our service every week is the children coming up to the table, because it's sometimes messy and it can be loud and chaotic, right? And they're dancing, right? And to me, that's the perfect picture of the kingdom. Not that all of the children are standing quietly with their hands folded, reverent and respectful. They're being themselves because they belong. Are we ever part of the multitude that just wants them to settle down? Just wants people to stay in their place? And then finally, are we like Jesus? And of course, this is the example we want to follow. When people cry out and we have the ability to help, do we, like Jesus, stop no matter how busy we are? No matter where we are in our day and on our journey? Do we consider the need of the one in crisis to be greater than our schedule and our agenda? And if we have the ability to help or to hear, do we stop and listen? Do we stop and help? Can we? What is that response that we should have like Jesus to hear those crying out, to help them realize the power they have within themselves to change their circumstances? Will we in our faith see the faith in others and walk with them, journey with them to wholeness? Amen.